Have you ever been in a situation where you felt especially anxious, vulnerable, even fearful, and you needed your closest friends to stand by you, to strengthen you and encourage you? Very likely we have experienced that. Think of this situation. You're out in the field ministry with your friends, working in a quiet neighborhood. You can see your friends up and down the street calling house to house as you are. All of a sudden, the police arrive. They single you out and tell you that you need to go to the police station with them. You look around for your friends, and they've all disappeared. They've left you alone to deal with the situation. How would that make you feel? Disappointed, discouraged, maybe even a bit angered. Well, now we get the sense of how Jesus must have felt there in the Garden of Gethsemane when a mob of his enemies came to arrest him and haul him away for trial. And where were his 11 closest friends? Well, as today's text says, they all abandoned him and fled. And yet just a few hours earlier, those same men had vowed to him that they would rather die than desert their Lord. Well, Jesus was human, and he has feelings just like us, even though he could perfectly keep them in check. Of course, Jesus did have an advantage. He had known that it was prophesied over 500 years in advance that something like that was going to happen to him. Let's read the prophecy. It's in Zechariah chapter 13. Zechariah 13 and verse 7. Jehovah had this written, O sword, awake against my shepherd, against the man who is my companion, declares Jehovah of armies. Strike the shepherd and let the flock be scattered. Well, as a result, look at what Jesus had told the 11 on their way from the upper room in Jerusalem to Gethsemane as he quoted that very prophecy to them. This is in Matthew chapter 26 and verse 31. Matthew 26, verse 31, it reports, Then Jesus said to them, All of you will be stumbled in connection with me on this night. For it is written, I will strike the shepherd, and the sheep of the flock will be scattered about. Now we can speculate about what the apostles were thinking as they stepped into the shadows to flee. Were they thinking, well, the Lord said this was going to happen, so I guess we're just doing our duty? Probably not. More than likely, it's logical to suppose that they were so terrified that the only thing they could think of was the quickest way to escape and to save themselves. Well, whatever they were thinking on that occasion, the 11 did not live up to the proverb that says, A true friend shows love at all times and is a brother who is born for times of distress. Proverbs 17:17. Now, can you think of a Bible principle that would help each of us to be that brother or that sister who is born for times of distress when one of our friends is especially anxious or vulnerable or fearful? Interestingly, 2 years before that traumatic incident in the Garden of Gethsemane, Jesus had taught a wonderful rule that, if always followed, would prevent any of us from ever letting down a friend who is in need of our support. He taught this in the Sermon on the Mount, and it is quoted by both of the gospel writers who recorded his sermon. Let's take a look at Matthew's account of it in Matthew chapter 7 and verse 12. Matthew 7:12. He wrote, All things, therefore, that you want men to do to you, you also must do to them. Here's how Luke worded it, just as you want men to do to you, do the same way to them. And that really is a golden rule for everyday life. Just as pure gold never tarnishes, the value of the golden rule has never diminished. And likely it's the most famous rule ever stated, but also it is one that's easily forgotten at times. Now, how can we apply it? Basically by just taking 2 steps. First of all, think, if I were in the other person's situation, how would I feel? What would I need? What would I want? And then second, take some positive action to do something good and merciful for that other person. It just starts with sharpening our sensitivity to the feelings of others. Now, in that, Jesus is an excellent example to imitate because on many occasions and under many circumstances, Jesus shared in the feelings of those who were suffering in some way. First of all, he was sensitive to their needs. He felt their pain in his heart. And second, he was moved to show compassion, and he took the initiative to help people. He reached out to those who were in distress. I'll give you a couple of examples. For instance, in Mark chapter 1, it shows us of how Jesus was moved to relieve people's suffering, because it tells of a time when Jesus was approached by a man who was full of leprosy.